Hello creatives, welcome to episode 5 of the Tailored Wellness. Today, I'll talk about structuring yourself mentally, physically, and above all, materially. To structure yourself means not ending up like me, after the last fashion show, when for a whole week my brain couldn't focus for more than 2.5 hours at a time. You need to make sure you're well prepared mentally, psychologically, spiritually, on every level to be able to keep your house in order. Fashion isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. Just so you know. So I'm actually going to start with the material side of things. I think that as a creator, at first, you imagine that 90% of your time is spent drawing, sewing, and doing photo shoots. You can forget about that ratio. It's more like 20% cleaner, 20% manager, 20% accountant. 20%. In breakdown, maybe 5% creative. I don't know, that adds to 100%. Getting organized important. To start a business, get legally organized. France is complicated, London was easy. Choose between two statuses, freelance or company. There's no SESU, SRL, S something, EUR, etc. I'm not the best person. I set up a SESU. I'd recommend checking out Legal Start or something like that. This isn't sponsored at all. Open your accountant, find your mates, do your research. ChatGPT is also a very good advisor sometimes. Make sure to double check with your accountant too, don't forget. You need to get organized. Getting organized means setting up your legal status, creating your company. And above all, the first thing I'll tell you is to protect your name. In Europe, you even get support with the EU, European IP, intellectual property, and so on. Be careful, just a side note, there are scams out there. When you register, you'll get fake letters from the EU IPO, but the real official one is EU IP. Be careful not to pay €2,000 to some scammer who sends you something in your post. So, really, protect your name, protect your domain name, your Instagram, your creations whenever you can. It might cost a bit of money, but depending on what you do, if it's a patent, a registered design, it's really important. It quickly turned out to be an unpleasant surprise. In my particular case, I had a bit of a problem. Where my name was stolen in China. So, it wasn't funny. It was complicated for a while, but I found good lawyers who got my name back. And on top of that, someone steals it from you. Honestly, it was all a real pain. It was recovered. So, from the moment you become visible, you need to protect yourself. It's important. Structuring yourself materially also means deciding what kind of business you are, what kind of creator you are. Are you a designer, a game designer? Are you a fashion designer? Are you a designer who sews? Do you need sewing machines? Do you need a premises? Do you need a space? A little tip, if you've just started out, apply for the Ateliers de Paris, so the BDMA I mentioned in another episode. Because you'll have a space with a community, which means that when you start out, you won't be on your own. Because not being alone is very important too, as it's easy to become isolated. When you're creating, you lose perspective, you stop counting the hours, and you end up a bit cut off from your work. So it's very important. Structuring yourself also means organizing your time. Work time, downtime, time for the different hats I mentioned earlier, having a good routine to take time for yourself, but also setting boundaries, and I really want to emphasize boundaries. Especially even Stephen, because it's not often the case, we don't always set boundaries, but you need to know, actually, when you're in the orange zone, not red or black, but you get back to green fairly quickly, you create a guideline for yourself. Okay, I've pushed myself too far here, I need this many hours of rest, or this much downtime, to be able to carry on. Structuring yourself also means talking about money, and there are a lot of taboos around money, because often money is linked to self-worth, and when you're a creative or an artist, you often don't understand the concept of money because you think that money equals time equals money. That's true, but it's not, for example, that I'm going to bill for a service for 2 hours and so my hourly rate is €40 an hour. So it'll cost 80 euros. No, if the work you do today in 2 hours is because, in fact, you have 50 experiences, whereas a junior might take 2 days to do it. So you need to understand the value of time, the value of the product or service you're offering, because it's always the perceived value. That will outweigh the value of time, a small nuance, but that's also about self-worth, and it's about understanding that at the beginning, we're like, no, I don't really dare, and so on. So you have to be comfortable with the price you set for your time and your products. But you also need to do some research about people at the same level as you. They try to position themselves, and above all, be very well prepared psychologically for these different aspects. It's very easy to have a client come to you and say it's too expensive, I want this price, and to have the right arguments to be able to demonstrate things without having to justify yourself. Sometimes it's a bit complicated. On the other hand, if you have someone who comes to see you and doesn't try to negotiate the price, it means you haven't charged enough and you could have gone higher sometimes. Both situations need to be considered. In any case, the relationship with money in business, especially when you're structuring yourself, is very important because in a company, you have expenses. You need to understand cash flow systems, margin systems, understand that expenses have an impact, that at some point you'll need to pay yourself, that you're in France, and that the costs are extremely expensive. All of that makes up your little business. I was always told, and I've seen it myself in past experiences, if you don't have cash flow, it's like having a body without blood. It doesn't work, it doesn't run, it doesn't move forward. So if all your money is out because you've paid all your bills and your clients haven't paid you, the business comes to a standstill, it's on its last legs, it needs mouth to mouth to wake it up a bit, and that's when things get complicated. A little anecdote, it's already happened to me to be in a cash flow crisis. It's not very pleasant. You end up calling everyone in a panic, and instead of being creative, you get caught in a downward spiral. Bloody hell, bloody hell, bloody hell, bloody hell, I'm not going to make it. So, take a breath, call the accountant, call the bank, find solutions, and plan ahead for your incomings and outgoings so you don't end up in that situation. Honestly, that's real advice. The tools to get organized. So just imagine, when you have a business and you start to take off, you need tools. The first thing I invested in, I think, was a domain name. stevenposoro.com. You can go and have a look. Oh, me. I wanted to have email addresses at stevenposoro.com, so I invested in a whole suite. Again, this isn't sponsored. There are other options out there. I went with Gmail because it was Google Workspace, because it was the easiest for me to use. I was used to it, for having professional emails. And it's better to have an address with your -name.com rather than gmail.com or whatever.com. It also gives a much more professional image. Accounting and invoicing software. Excel, no, Excel isn't good for that. Forget what I said. Excel is a nightmare. We're not allowed to anymore. Everything has to be justified. So, invoicing software where you send your invoices and quotes, and you have your cash flow tracking, your income and expense monitoring. Essential. I think those are the two most important things, emails and that. Once you've got that, you've got the fashion system, and there are loads of tools to budget your collections, track your collection sales, and so on. But that's more for later on, once you've already started to get into the swing of things. And then, I'm talking about fashion, but again, it's also for creatives. So, photographer, copywriter, or stylist, whatever it may be. We get organized. We present a good professional image of all this. Do I have any other points? Let me check my list. I mustn't forget anything for you. Yes. The team, it's crucial to surround yourself with the right people. When you start out with an intern, good, simple. You delegate, and even then, start hard. Because honestly, a control freak beginning, clinging to everything. You need to breathe. I can delegate that. It's not most important. You learn that. I was supported, more later. We had a power cut, no big deal. I paid the bill, I promise. After this brief interruption to get power back on, I'm returning to topic of team. Team is important. So, I was talking about when you have an intern, when you're on your own, you can delegate a bit. But once you start having interns, freelancers, apprentices, employees, it gets more complicated. It's very important that the people working with you share the same vision, that there's not too much ego, and that you're all there for the good of everyone. That is, to have the same vision and for everyone to be on the same page. Everyone is pulling in the right direction. There are no small roles in a small business, only important ones. Whether it's the intern who goes to pick up fabrics, parcels because the press is waiting, and so on. That's precious time that I, as the creator, can use to handle the most important things. It's there. It's essential. I really think it's the most important thing, because when someone is feeling a bit down or when personal tensions arise, or even tensions within the company, it's important to have people around you who ground you and remind you that sometimes you need to take a step back, and that you don't always have to be pushing yourself to the limit. I can't remember, did I talk about the place? Having a place is important. I work with Style 3D in fantastic offices in Paris. It's bliss because we have technology and craft-side workshop. When I started out, Ateliers de Paris. And that was really also the real joy of connecting with a community. And from there, it's about deciding I have machines or not. Do I create all my designs through external providers? Is my studio purely a creative vision, and so everything is done outside? Or do we have the craft and creative side, as I've chosen to do? So, how do you need to invest in sewing machines, heat press machines, threading, mannequins, Stockman dummies, Alban ones? It's a whole package. It costs money. Honestly, for my first investments, I put everything I had into the workshop. That was my choice, a sacrifice I had to make. But that's what has allowed me today to have control over everything we produce and to be extremely efficient in terms of responsiveness to customer orders. I was thinking about things in terms of funding. Think about competitions. There are loads of competitions, whether it's Maisons Méditerranéennes, Elandame, the LVMH Prize, the City of Paris competition, the Hayes Festival, and others, sometimes smaller ones. There's the Ministry of Culture's call for projects as well. I was a winner of the last ones. Same goes here. Look into it. You need to have a bit of experience and some business sense and money, but there is support available to help you get organized and assist you with equipment. Which brings me to the perfect segue for getting organized mentally. And here, I want to dedicate this part a bit to Yola, who supported me for 2, maybe 3 years, I can't remember, who was a bit like my coach and my amazing mate during lockdown, with whom I used to have FaceTime calls. To coach me. And at the start, it was Yola, who had worked for luxury houses for 20 years, at Chloe, at Balmain, who really has a keen eye for quality. So you can imagine I had someone right behind me, eyes glued to my finishing touches, telling me, that's not right, that's pulling, which is brilliant. But above all, my biggest surprise with her was the truly all-encompassing support on me as a creator, me as their child, me as an adult, me as a neurodivergent person, and how all of that comes together as a whole, and how I manage my emotions, my decisions, my relationship with image. I think if someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd be doing this in front of a camera, I would have said no, sod off, absolutely not. I've worked on myself, thank you Yola, to be comfortable today and able to talk about my work, my past, what inspires me, what I share, my values, and all that in a way that feels a bit more natural. And that's also part of the game of being a creator today. I think years ago, you could hide away in your workshop. Nowadays, a creator, you have to be an influencer. I hate that word, but you have to be visible. You have to be visible, you have to stand out, you have to be present. There really is an ecosystem that's saturated. So, sometimes you have to speak up, put yourself out there, and defend your vision. I think the first thing we did with Yola was to understand my motivations. to understand why I wanted to work in fashion. Why in Paris? Why in Paris? You were forced into it at the start. Because, coming back from, leaving England because of Brexit, arriving in Paris and getting hit with X months of lockdown, which, personally, I loved, being stuck in my basement with my sewing machine and my fabrics. Best life, not talking to anyone or anything. Brilliant, but still, it's only temporary. But I had to answer those questions. Today, if I wanted to answer clearly, for me, working in fashion was an escape. It really was an escape, but at the same time, a passion. That was truly the moment when I wanted to create this creative space where I could be myself, feel safe, secure. It's a bit cathartic, where everything inside, all the sort of turmoil, trauma, and so on, you put it down on paper, in a drawing, and you let it out, you heal it. So you also need to know what to put in, when, and not to overdo it. You have to know, as I was saying earlier, how to prepare yourself for the time I spend creating, the time I spend on admin, what expectations there are for my creative work, the preconceptions in the field, what I should be, what I shouldn't be. The fear of showing yourself, the fear of revealing yourself, and sometimes even the fear of succeeding. It was really a quite deep process, I must say, one I never thought I would go through at all. And it also stripped away a lot of unconscious protection I had around my work. In fact, I feel like the more I peeled back the layers of the onion, the closer I got to my own deep truth, the more I could express myself freely, be creative freely, and not necessarily get stuck, like when you hit a blank page because you're... How can I put it? It's something unconscious that you don't even notice, and you get blocked. Or else you end up in Paris. The first collection I did in Paris, I tried to fit into that Parisian designer mold, which was a bit of a mistake, but you learn from it. And actually, it wasn't necessarily the best collection I've ever shown. In London, I really felt very free. And Paris, it's like the stars are a bit more tightly packed. You know, it's a bit like, we weren't in a mold before, but when you arrive in Paris, you get put into one, except it's not a mold you like, so you gradually break out of it. But it was very important. I know I set up rituals. At one point, I meditated every day. Even now, I have journaling notebook. Whenever I need to lay out thoughts, I write everything down. Anything goes, from the weather, to what I ate last night, to my current crush. Nothing gets left out, but it does me good. At least it's not spinning around in my head. It's all on paper in one place. And I also try to avoid having loads of to-do lists. I just have one, with a post-it on my computer. The rest, things get scattered on Notion, in notes, bits and bobs, but still. We do have a guideline, at least. And I think the phrase that stuck with me most from Yola was, sometimes there are much simpler ways of being, rather than just surviving or reacting to what we've been through and our past. That's deep. But that's in relation to my own experience, my own story, where I was often just reacting to what was happening to me. And at some point, it's about stepping out of reaction mode and taking action towards what we actually want, instead of just reacting to what we don't want. And that was really the big lesson I had to apply in my work, which allowed me to deal with complicated situations or sometimes conflicts with someone in the team, where I had to stick to the facts even in the midst of emotion. It's about learning to manage your own emotions, and sometimes also those of your team, even if that's not really my responsibility. But it's about making sure the whole machine runs smoothly, that everything goes well so you know how to handle things. Because being creative demands a lot from you, it's very easy to burn out. And there you go. I've had lots of really good advice to help me with the different aspects of creative, personal, emotional, and spiritual well-being, as well as being a business leader, all within 2 years. These are tools I still use today. They allow me, even after a show like the one in June, as I mentioned at the start, when I was absolutely exhausted for a week and told myself, okay, your brain can't think for more than 3 hours, so it needs this many days of rest. And now, a month later, Everything's fine. And what I want to ask you today is, what are you doing for your own balance? Have you managed to set up a routine? Or do you need some advice? If so, just leave a comment or send me an email, and I'll be more than happy to respond.